The moment my father's lawyer called to inform him that the house he'd kicked me out of was actually in my name, his face went white. "There must be some mistake," he stammered into the phone. But there was no mistake. The house he'd given to my golden child brother? The one he'd told me to leave so Jacob could have my bedroom? It had been in my name for 3 years. I'd been paying the mortgage the whole time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Kaia, and this is the story of how being thrown away by my family became the catalyst for building an empire they never saw coming. Growing up in Kansas City, Missouri, I was always the invisible daughter. Not in the dramatic, Cinderella locked in the attic way, but in the quieter, more insidious way that slowly erodes your sense of worth until you're not sure you ever had any to begin with. My brother Jacob was the golden child. 3 years older, effortlessly charismatic, naturally athletic, the son my father had always dreamed of having. The heir to carry on the family name. The one who mattered. I was the afterthought. The daughter who came along unexpectedly when my mother thought she was done having children. The girl who never quite measured up no matter how hard she tried. And I tried so hard it physically hurt sometimes. I remember being 7 years old, bringing home a report card with straight A's, so proud I could barely contain my smile. I'd worked myself to exhaustion, staying up late with flashcards, reading ahead in every textbook, determined to be perfect. When I showed my father, he glanced at it for maybe 3 seconds before looking back at the television. "That's nice, honey," he said absently. "Jacob, come here. I want to show you this play." Jacob had just scored a touchdown in his youth football game. Dad replayed the recording 7 times that evening, pointing out every successful move, beaming with pride. My report card sat on the coffee table, forgotten under a stack of sports magazines. That became the pattern of my childhood. Jacob's B's were celebrated because he was trying his best while managing sports. My A's were expected because academics came naturally to me, or so they assumed. Never mind that I studied until my eyes burned. Never mind that I organized elaborate projects and presentations that went far beyond the requirements. It didn't count as achievement if it looked easy. When I was 9, I wrote a short story that my teacher submitted to a local young writers competition. I won first place in my age category. The award ceremony was on a Saturday afternoon, and I reminded my parents about it every day for 2 weeks leading up to it. The morning of the ceremony, Jacob had a last-minute baseball game. His team was in 4th place out of 8. It wasn't playoffs or championships. Just a regular season game that didn't matter in the grand scheme of anything. "We'll drop you off at your writing thing and then head to Jacob's game," my father said, not looking up from his coffee. "It's not a thing, Dad. It's an award ceremony. I won first place. They're going to announce it and I get to read part of my story." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," my mother said in that distracted voice she used when she was already thinking about something else. "We're so proud of you." But they didn't stay. They dropped me off at the library where the ceremony was being held, promised they'd be back in time to hear me read, and then drove to Jacob's baseball game. I sat in that library auditorium, watching the door, waiting for them to walk through. When my name was called, I walked to the podium and read my story to an audience of strangers. Other kids had their parents there, beaming from the front row, taking pictures, recording videos. I had an empty seat where my family should have been. When they picked me up afterward, I was sitting on the library steps with my certificate and a small trophy. "How was it?" my mother asked cheerfully as I climbed into the back seat. "Fine. Did you win?" I held up the trophy silently. "Oh, that's lovely. We'll put it on your shelf." Jacob's team won his game. It was so exciting. You should have seen the catch he made in the 8th inning. They talked about Jacob's catch for the entire 20-minute drive home. My trophy went on a shelf in my bedroom where no one but me would ever see it. Jacob's baseball trophies lined the mantel in the living room like a shrine. That's when I started to understand the fundamental truth of my place in this family. I could achieve anything, accomplish everything, and it would never matter as much as the most mundane thing Jacob did. High school was where I truly began building my armor. I threw myself into academics with an almost manic intensity, driven by some desperate hope that if I was extraordinary enough, they'd have to notice me. Valedictorian wasn't just a goal, it was a survival strategy. Proof of worth. Evidence that I existed. I took every advanced placement class available. I edited the school newspaper. I volunteered at the library on weekends and tutored underclassmen after school. I wrote constantly, filling notebook after notebook with stories about girls who mattered, who were seen, who were chosen. My guidance counselor called my parents in for a meeting junior year. Kaia is on track to be valedictorian, Mrs. Henderson told them, her voice warm with pride. Her test scores are exceptional. She could get into any university in the country. We should start thinking about applications to Ivy League schools. I watched my parents' faces, hoping for excitement or pride or even surprise. My father nodded politely. My mother smiled that vague smile she wore when she wasn't really paying attention. That's wonderful, Dad said. Though we're hoping she'll stay closer to home. Somewhere practical. Maybe the state university has a teaching program. Mrs. Henderson looked confused. Mr. Morrison, with Kaia's credentials, she could pursue any field she wants. Her writing is extraordinary. She could study creative writing or journalism at Columbia, Northwestern, anywhere. Writing isn't exactly a stable career, my father said dismissively. She needs something she can fall back on. I sat there, watching my guidance counselor fight for my potential while my father actively tried to limit it. The message was clear: don't dream too big, don't reach too far, don't take up too much space. That night, I applied to Northwestern, Columbia, and 6 other schools without telling my parents. I'd pay for the application fees from my tutoring money. I'd handle the essays and recommendations myself. I'd stopped expecting help years ago. Senior year, I worked myself to the edge of collapse. Between my course load, extracurriculars, college applications, and the part-time job I'd taken at a bookstore, I barely slept. But I was terrified of slowing down, as if stopping meant disappearing completely. In March, the acceptance letters started arriving. Northwestern with a partial scholarship. Columbia. University of Chicago. Boston University. Each one felt like validation, like proof that someone, somewhere thought I was worth investing in. I showed my parents the Northwestern acceptance letter. It was my top choice, and the scholarship covered half the tuition. That's very far away, my mother said, worry creasing her forehead. It's a 6-hour drive, I said. And it's one of the best schools in the country for what I want to study. What you want to study is writing, my father interjected. Kaia, be realistic. How are you going to support yourself as a writer? What about teaching? You could get your education degree at state, live at home, save money. I don't want to be a teacher. You're 18 years old. You don't know what you want. The irony was suffocating. Jacob had been encouraged to pursue business at an expensive private university 3 states away. He'd been told to follow his dreams, to think big, to not worry about money because it was an investment in his future. I was being told to be practical, stay close, think small. I'm going to Northwestern, I said quietly. I've already accepted. My father's face hardened. And how exactly do you plan to pay for it? The scholarship doesn't cover everything. Student loans. I'll work part-time. You'll drown in debt studying something impractical. Then I guess that's my mistake to make. That was the first time I truly stood up to him. It felt terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Like stepping off a cliff and discovering you could fly. He didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. Then came graduation day. The day that should have been a celebration of 4 years of relentless work. The day that instead became the moment I truly understood that I would always be alone in my achievements. I was valedictorian, just as I'd planned. My speech was written and rewritten a dozen times until every word felt right. It was about resilience, about building your own path when the road you're given leads nowhere. About girls who refuse to disappear just because no one's looking. The morning of graduation, I was up at 6 a.m., too nervous and excited to sleep. I ironed my white dress, practiced my speech one more time in the mirror, and came downstairs to find my parents already dressed and moving around the kitchen with purpose. "Big day," I said, unable to keep the hope out of my voice. "It is," my mother agreed, pouring coffee into a travel mug. "We should leave by 9 to get good seats," I said. "The ceremony starts at 10, but they're expecting a big crowd." My father looked up from his phone, and something in his expression made my stomach drop. "Kaia, we need to talk to you about something." Those words. The ones that never led anywhere good. "What is it?" "Jacob called last night. He's moving into a new apartment in Denver today, and he needs help. The movers fell through, and he's got to be out of his old place by noon." I stared at him. "Today? Graduation is today." "We know, sweetheart," my mother said in that placating tone that always preceded disappointment. "And we're so proud of you. But Jacob is in a really difficult situation, and he needs our help. I need you here. I'm giving the valedictorian speech." "We'll be back tomorrow," my father said, as if that solved anything. "We can celebrate then. Take you to dinner, whatever you want. The graduation is today. Right now. In 4 hours. Kaia, don't be dramatic. Graduations are all the same. You walk across a stage, get a piece of paper. Jacob needs actual help with a crisis." The word dramatic hit me like a slap. Wanting your parents at your high school graduation, the graduation where you're giving the valedictorian speech after 4 years of killing yourself academically, was dramatic. But dropping everything to help a 21-year-old man move apartments was reasonable family obligation. "Please don't go," I heard myself say, and I hated how small my voice sounded. "Please. This matters to me." My mother looked genuinely torn, which somehow made it worse. At least if she'd been indifferent, I could have written her off completely. But she looked sad, which meant she knew exactly what she was choosing and was choosing it anyway. "Honey, if there was any way we could be in 2 places at once, we would be. But Jacob really needs us. And I don't?" The question hung in the air, unanswered because the answer was obvious. My father picked up his car keys. "We'll be back tomorrow night. We're proud of you, Kaia. Congratulations on all your hard work." They left. Actually left me standing in the kitchen on my graduation day, watching through the window as their car pulled out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, too stunned to cry. Then I called my best friend Mara. "They left," I said when she answered. "What?" "My parents. They left for Denver. Jacob needs help moving." The silence on the other end of the line said everything. Mara had watched this dynamic for years, had witnessed countless times when I'd been overlooked or dismissed. She knew. "I'm coming to get you," she said finally. "You're riding to graduation with my family. And we're going to cheer loud enough that you won't even notice those empty seats." Mara's family picked me up an hour later. Her parents hugged me tight and told me they were proud of me. Her younger sister made me a bouquet of flowers from their garden. Her father said, "You're going to be amazing up there, kiddo." I'm honored we get to witness it. They weren't my family, but in that moment, they were closer than my actual family had ever been. The auditorium was packed. I stood backstage, watching families file in, watching parents save seats and aim cameras at the stage. I thought about my parents on some highway heading west, probably listening to music, maybe stopping for coffee, not thinking about what they were missing. When my name was called to give the valedictorian speech, I walked to the podium with my head high. I looked out at the audience and found Mara's family in the 4th row, holding up a homemade sign that said Kaia. Valedictorian. Her father had his camera ready, her mother was beaming, and Mara was on her feet cheering. I gave my speech. Every word about resilience and forging your own path felt heavier with meaning. I talked about how sometimes the people who should lift you up are the ones who weigh you down, and how the most radical act of self-love is learning to validate yourself. We spend so much of our lives seeking approval from people who will never give it, I said, my voice steady and clear. And at some point, we have to choose between chasing that approval or building a life that doesn't need it. I choose the latter. I choose to stop shrinking myself to fit into spaces where I was never meant to belong. I choose to build my own space instead. The applause was thunderous. Mara's family was on their feet, and so were dozens of teachers who'd watched me work myself to exhaustion for 4 years. I saw Mrs. Henderson, my guidance counselor, crying. But 2 seats sat empty. The 2 that mattered most. And in their emptiness, they taught me the most valuable lesson I'd ever learn: you cannot earn love from people who've decided you're not worth it. You can only decide you're worth it yourself and move forward. That night, alone in my childhood bedroom surrounded by acceptance letters and a trophy nobody but me had seen, I made myself a promise that would define the next 15 years of my life. I would never again wait for my parents' approval. I would never again shrink my achievements to make room for Jacob's mediocrity. I would never again believe that their inability to see me meant I was invisible. I would build a life so undeniable, so extraordinary, that their neglect would become their loss, not my deficit. But what happened next, the years of struggle, the betrayal, the moment I discovered they'd been using me for far more than just emotional labor, that's where the real story begins. Part 2, the building years. Northwestern University was my liberation. For the first time in my life, I existed in a space where nobody knew Jacob, where my achievements stood on their own, where I could breathe without feeling like I was taking up too much air. But freedom came with a price tag I could barely afford. The scholarship covered half my tuition, but there was still room and board, books, fees, living expenses. I'd been naive about how expensive college actually was. My parents had helped Jacob with his expenses, not fully covering them, but contributing significantly. I'd hoped for the same. 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave for Northwestern, I brought up the subject of finances over dinner. So we should probably talk about my expenses for school, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. The scholarship helps, but there's still a gap. My father cut into his steak without looking up. We talked about this. Northwestern was your choice. An expensive choice. You helped Jacob with his expenses at his university. Jacob's degree has a clear career path. He's studying business. That's practical. You're studying English literature. What kind of job does that lead to? Writing, editing, publishing, teaching, communications, none of which pay particularly well, my father interrupted. Jacob's investment makes financial sense. Yours is more of a personal indulgence. Personal indulgence. My education, the thing I'd worked 4 years to achieve, the opportunity I'd earned through relentless effort, was a personal indulgence. So you're not going to help at all? We'll help when you choose something practical, my mother said gently, as if that made it better. If you change your major to education or business, we can talk about contributing. But we're not funding an English degree. I felt something harden in my chest. A calcification of resentment that would take years to fully form. Okay, I said quietly. I understand. I understood perfectly. Jacob's dreams were investments. Mine were indulgences. Jacob's ambitions deserved support. Mine deserved skepticism. It was the same dynamic that had defined my entire childhood, just with a new financial dimension. That night, I applied for every student loan I qualified for and started searching for part-time jobs I could do once I got to campus. I moved into my dorm in late August with 2 suitcases and a determination that bordered on obsession. While my roommate's parents spent hours helping her decorate and organize, crying over their baby leaving home, I unpacked alone and then immediately walked to the student employment office. By the end of my first week, I had 3 part-time jobs: morning shifts at a coffee shop near campus, evening tutoring sessions for underclassmen struggling with writing, and weekend administrative work at a law firm downtown that needed someone to organize files and do data entry. My schedule was brutal. Classes from 9 to 3 most days, tutoring from 4 to 6, law firm work all day Saturday and Sunday mornings, coffee shop shifts at 6 a.m. on weekdays before class. I was making about $1,100 a month, which barely covered my expenses after tuition, but it was enough to survive. What it didn't leave room for was a social life, adequate sleep, or any sense of being an actual college student having a formative experience. My roommate, Jessica, would invite me to parties or study groups, and I'd have to decline because I was working. She'd sleep in on weekends while I was up at 5 a.m. to catch the train downtown to the law firm. She'd go out for dinner with friends while I ate ramen in our dorm room, too exhausted to do anything but eat and sleep. "You're going to burn out," she said one night, watching me fall asleep at my desk while trying to read for my American literature class. "I don't have a choice," I mumbled. "Everyone has a choice. Not everyone has parents willing to pay their way." She didn't understand. She came from money, the kind where college expenses weren't even a discussion. Her parents just wrote checks. She couldn't comprehend what it meant to be talented enough to get into a top university but too broke to enjoy being there. But I survived. And more than survived, I excelled. Because somewhere in that brutal schedule, I found clarity. Every hour I worked was an hour I was building something mine. Every dollar I earned was a dollar I didn't owe to anyone. Every A I received in my classes felt different than the A's in high school. These weren't achievements I was presenting to parents who didn't care. These were achievements I was collecting for myself. My creative writing professor, Dr. Sarah Chen, took notice of me second semester freshman year. I'd turned in a short story about a girl who worked 3 jobs to put herself through college, slowly disappearing into exhaustion until she wasn't sure if she existed or was just a collection of timesheets and obligations. Dr. Chen asked me to stay after class. "Kaia, this is exceptional work," she said, holding up my story. "Dark, honest, beautifully constructed. Have you thought about submitting to literary magazines?" I hadn't. I was too busy working to think about anything beyond the immediate demands of survival. "You have real talent," she continued. "But more than that, you have something to say. That's rarer than you think. I'd like to work with you outside of class if you're interested. Help you develop your voice, guide you toward publication opportunities." It was the first time a parental age figure had looked at my work and seen genuine value instead of a hobby that needed to be outgrown. I almost cried right there in her office. "I'd love that," I managed. "But I should tell you, I'm working 3 jobs. I don't have a lot of free time." Dr. Chen's expression shifted to understanding and something else, sadness, maybe, or recognition. "Let's work around your schedule. Email me your availability, and we'll find time." She became my mentor, the person who taught me that my writing wasn't a personal indulgence but a legitimate skill with real value. Over the next 3 years, she helped me revise stories, navigate the submission process for literary magazines, and understand the business side of publishing. By junior year, I'd published 4 short stories in respectable literary journals. Small publications, but real ones. Proof that my work could exist in the world beyond my notebooks. I sent copies to my parents. I thought maybe, finally, they'd see that my degree wasn't a waste. That I was building something real. My mother called 2 weeks later. "Honey, I got the magazines you sent." My heart lifted. "Did you read my stories?" "I started one, but it was very dark." "Is everything okay? Are you depressed?" The question felt like a slap. I'd poured my truth into those stories, the exhaustion, the isolation, the bone-deep fatigue of working myself into the ground to prove I deserved space in the world. And her takeaway was concern about my mental health, not pride in my accomplishment. "I'm fine, Mom. Those are just stories." "Well, they're very intense. Maybe you should write something happier? Something more uplifting?" "I'm writing what's true. Truth doesn't have to be depressing, sweetheart. Anyway, I wanted to tell you that Jacob got promoted. He's the youngest account manager at his firm now. Your father and I are so proud." And just like that, the conversation shifted to Jacob. His promotion, his girlfriend, his new apartment. My publications, the things I'd worked years to achieve, were dismissed as too dark, too depressing, too much. I stopped sending them my work after that. Senior year, I applied for MFA programs in creative writing. Competitive, fully funded programs that would let me focus on writing without the crushing financial burden. Dr. Chen helped me prepare my application materials, and I threw everything I had into the writing samples. I got into the Iowa Writers' Workshop with full funding. One of the most prestigious MFA programs in the country, and they'd accepted me with a fellowship that covered tuition plus a small stipend for living expenses. I called my parents, unable to contain my excitement. "That's wonderful, honey," my mother said. "How long is the program?" 2 years. "But it's fully funded, and it's Iowa." "That's where writers go." 2 more years of school?" my father asked, getting on the line. "Kaia, at some point you need to enter the real world. Get a real job. This is a real path to a real career, Dad. Writers who graduate from Iowa get book deals, teaching positions, literary careers. Most of them probably also have family money to fall back on," he said. "You don't. You're going to be 23 years old with a master's degree in writing and no practical work experience. No one's going to hire you." I felt the familiar weight of his disapproval settling over me. Jacob was 23 with just a bachelor's degree when he got hired. Jacob has a business degree. That's marketable. You're prolonging adolescence by staying in school to write stories. Prolonging adolescence. That's what he called the thing I'd worked toward my entire life. The goal I'd sacrificed every social experience, every moment of rest, every shred of normalcy to achieve. "I'm going to Iowa," I said, my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. "With or without your approval." "Suit yourself," my father said. "But don't come crying to us when you're 30 and broke with an unemployable degree." The Iowa Writers' Workshop was intense in the best possible way. Workshops where we tore each other's work apart and built it back better. Seminars with visiting authors who'd actually made it. A community of people who understood that writing wasn't a hobby but a calling, a necessity, the way some people need to breathe. I thrived there in ways I never had before. My stories got sharper, more sophisticated. I started working on what would become my first novel, a semi-autobiographical story about a girl whose parents treated her like a ghost, so she became one, literally fading from view until she had to fight to make herself solid again. The metaphor wasn't subtle, but it was honest. During my second year at Iowa, my phone rang at 2 in the morning. I'd been up writing, the only time I could find real silence, and I almost didn't answer when I saw it was my father. "Dad? What's wrong?" "Kaia, I need to talk to you about something important." His voice was strained, careful. Warning bells went off in my head. "Are you okay? Is Mom okay?" "We're fine. It's not that. It's about finances. We need your help with something." I sat down on my bed, my laptop forgotten. "What kind of help?" "Your mother and I have been having some financial difficulties. Medical bills, some unexpected expenses." "We're fine," he added quickly, "but we need to do some estate planning. Make sure things are protected." "Okay," I said slowly, unsure where this was going. "We want to put the house in your name. For tax purposes and asset protection." I was 24 years old and barely making ends meet on my fellowship stipend. "Why would you put the house in my name?" "If it's in our names and we have medical debt, the house could be at risk. But if it's in your name, it's protected. You'd let Jacob live there if something happened to us, right?" "It's just paperwork, Kaia. Just a formality." Every instinct I had screamed that this was a trap. That there was information I wasn't getting. But that small, desperate part of me that still wanted to matter to them heard something else. They were trusting me with something important. They needed me for something real. "What about Jacob? Why not put it in his name? Jacob's doing well financially." He doesn't need the house. And besides, this way if anything happens, you'll have an asset. Something to fall back on. It felt like a gift. Like maybe, finally, they were recognizing that I'd been the responsible one all along. That I'd worked harder, sacrificed more, proven myself more reliable. Looking back, I can't believe how naive I was. How desperately I wanted their validation that I ignored every red flag. Okay, I said. I'll do it. Good. We'll have our lawyer draw up the papers. 3 weeks later, I signed documents transferring the house deed into my name. I also signed documents accepting responsibility for any liens or debts attached to the property. The language was dense and legal, and I didn't have a lawyer review it because hiring a lawyer seemed paranoid. My father had explained it as protecting the family asset. Making sure the house stayed in the family no matter what happened with medical bills or debt. What he didn't explain was that they'd taken out a home equity loan for $80,000 2 years earlier. The mortgage they'd almost paid off had been refinanced, and now there were 15 years of payments left at $750 a month. I didn't find out about the loan until 6 months later when the bank sent me a notice as the deed holder. My parents had missed 3 payments. I called my father, my hands shaking. Dad, the bank sent me a notice about missed mortgage payments on the house. Silence. Dad? I was going to tell you, he said finally. We just hit a rough patch. We'll catch up. You took out an $80,000 loan and didn't tell me? I'm legally responsible for this property. The payments aren't that high. We'll handle it. You're 3 months behind. Kaia, don't make this into a crisis. We'll figure it out. But they didn't figure it out. The missed payments continued. And because I couldn't stand the thought of the house going into foreclosure, because I couldn't bear the idea of ruining my credit before my life even really started, I started making the payments myself. $750 a month out of my fellowship stipend and what little I made from freelance editing jobs. Money I desperately needed for rent, food, basic survival. I was 25 years old, living in Iowa City, eating rice and beans for most meals, wearing the same 5 outfits on rotation because I couldn't afford new clothes, and paying the mortgage on my parents' house in Kansas City. And I didn't tell them I was paying it. Some instinct told me that knowledge was power, and I needed to hold on to whatever power I could get. I finished my MFA and started submitting my novel to literary agents. The rejections came in waves. Too dark. Too depressing. Not commercial enough. Too literary. Not literary enough. No clear market. Beautiful writing but not marketable. 43 agents rejected my first novel. I was living in Chicago by then, having moved there after Iowa because it had a thriving publishing scene and was cheaper than New York. I worked at a small publishing house for $28,000 a year, barely enough to cover rent and expenses, and continued paying my parents' mortgage. I started writing a second novel. Lighter, more commercial, the kind of story agents said they were looking for. It took me 8 months to finish while working full-time and barely sleeping. I found an agent with that one. After 63 queries, one agent saw potential. She was young, hungry, building her list. We revised the manuscript together for 4 months, and then she sent it out to publishers. 22 passes. Beautiful writing, not right for our list, tough market, loved the voice but not the story, all the usual euphemisms for no thanks. I was 26 years old and felt ancient. Exhausted. Like I'd been running a marathon my entire life and the finish line kept moving further away. But I kept writing. Because what else could I do? Writing was the only thing I'd ever been good at, the only thing that felt authentically mine. My third novel was different. It was angry. A story about a woman who spent her entire life making herself smaller to fit into her family's narrow definition of acceptable, until one day she stopped. Just stopped shrinking. Started taking up all the space she'd been denied. That one sold. A small press offered a modest advance, $12,000, barely anything in publishing terms but life-changing for me. Enough to pay off some debt, build a tiny financial cushion, breathe for a few months. The book came out to crickets initially. Small print run, minimal marketing, the reality for most debut authors from independent presses. But slowly, through word of mouth and book bloggers and sheer persistence, it found readers. Women who recognized themselves in the story. Who'd also been the overlooked daughter, the family ATM, the one expected to give everything and be grateful for scraps. Reviews started coming in. Starred reviews from trade publications. Reader reviews that said things like "I felt seen" and "This is my story." A year after publication, that third novel was selling steadily, not blockbuster numbers but respectable. Enough that my publisher wanted a second book. Enough that my agent started getting interest from bigger publishers for my next project. I sent a signed copy to my parents with a note, "This one's dedicated to everyone who was told they were too much and not enough at the same time." My mother called 3 weeks later. "Honey, we got your book. Did you read it?" "I started it, but Kaia, it's so angry. The mother character is just awful. I hope you don't see me that way." The mother character was neglectful, dismissive, passively complicit in her daughter's erasure. If she saw herself in that character, maybe she should sit with why. "It's fiction, Mom." Well, it doesn't feel like fiction. It feels like you're working through some kind of resentment. Maybe you should talk to someone. I am talking to someone. The thousands of readers who understand exactly what I'm writing about. There's no need to be defensive. I'm just concerned. Anyway, did we tell you Jacob's getting married? His girlfriend Stephanie is lovely. They're planning a wedding in Denver next summer. And there it was. My book, my career, my accomplishment, dismissed and pathologized in under 2 minutes before the conversation shifted to Jacob. I stopped expecting anything different after that call. Stopped hoping for the miraculous moment when they'd suddenly see me. Stopped carrying the weight of their approval like a cross I needed to bear. But what I didn't stop doing was paying their mortgage. Every month, $750 quietly transferred from my account to theirs. 3 years of payments. $27,000 total. They never mentioned it. Never thanked me. Never even acknowledged that the house hadn't gone into foreclosure. I assumed they thought Medicare or some government program was covering it. They'd always been willfully ignorant about money, assuming things just worked out without understanding the mechanics of how. Then, when I was 29 years old and my writing career had finally gained real traction, my 4th novel had sold to a major publisher for 6 figures, my backlist was being reissued, I was getting speaking invitations and teaching opportunities, my father called with a request that would finally expose every ugly truth about our family dynamic. "Kaia, we need to talk about the house." I was in my condo in Chicago, the first place I'd ever been able to afford that felt like home. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, room for a dedicated writing office, space to breathe. What about it? Jacob's moving back to Kansas City. He and Stephanie are having some financial troubles in Denver. They need a place to live while they get back on their feet. My stomach dropped. So they'd be living with you and Mom? Actually, your mother and I have been thinking about downsizing. There's a nice senior apartment community with better amenities, easier maintenance. We found a place we really like. That sounds great, I said carefully, waiting for the other shoe to drop. So we'd like to let Jacob and Stephanie live in the house. Give it to them, really. Help them get back on their feet. There it was. Give them the house, I repeated slowly. Well, you'd have to transfer the deed since it's technically in your name. But that's just paperwork, right? The house was always meant to stay in the family. And I'm not family? Don't be ridiculous, Kaia. Of course you're family. But you've got your place in Chicago. You don't need the house. Jacob does. The audacity was breathtaking. They wanted me to transfer the house I'd been paying the mortgage on for 3 years to my brother who'd never contributed a single dollar to the family property. Dad, Do you know why that house didn't go into foreclosure? What do you mean? I mean, you stopped making payments 3 years ago. The bank contacted me because my name was on the deed. I've been making the mortgage payments ever since. $750 a month for 36 months. That's $27,000. The silence on the other end was profound. You never said anything, he finally managed. Neither did you. You never mentioned you couldn't afford the payments. You just let me quietly take on the debt. We thought Medicare was covering things. Or the bank had some kind of assistance program. You thought wrong. I've been paying. Out of my own pocket, while working multiple jobs, while building my career, while barely surviving. I've been keeping your house out of foreclosure. Kaia, we didn't know, and now you want me to just hand it over to Jacob? The brother who's never once helped financially? Who's never once asked how I'm doing or offered support? He's struggling right now. His marriage is having problems. He needs family support. The words I'd heard 1,000 times in 1,000 different contexts. Jacob needs. Jacob deserves. Jacob is struggling. And where was family support when I was working 3 jobs in college? When I was living on rice and beans while paying your mortgage? When I was sending you books you never read and achievements you never celebrated? That's not fair, Kaia. No, what's not fair is asking me to hand over an asset I've been maintaining to a brother who's done nothing to earn it. He's your brother. Family helps family. Then he can help himself. The house is in my name, I've been paying for it, and if Jacob wants to live there, he can pay me rent. Market rate. $1,500 a month. $1,500? He can't afford that. Then he can't afford to live in my house. Your house? My father's voice turned cold. We gave you that house. No, you put it in my name and stopped paying for it. I gave myself that house by keeping it out of foreclosure. Those are very different things. I see. So this is who you really are. Selfish. Willing to profit off your own family's struggles. The word selfish hit me with less impact than it would have years ago. I'd built armor from too many disappointments. I'm the person you made me, Dad. The one who learned that love in this family is conditional. That value in this family is measured by how useful you are. Fine. I'll be useful on my terms now. If you do this, you're going to destroy this family. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just refusing to be destroyed anymore. I hung up. For 3 days, no one called. Then my mother tried, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt and genuine desperation. Kaia, how could you do this to your brother? He's family. So am I, Mom. But you've never treated me like family. You've treated me like the backup option. The one who doesn't really count. That's not true. We've always loved you. Have you? Tell me one thing about my life right now. One thing about my career, my friends, my world. The silence stretched long enough that I knew the answer. You can't, can you? But I bet you can tell me everything about Jacob. His job, his marriage, his struggles, his plans. You know everything about him and nothing about me because you've never bothered to look. Kaia, that's not fair. What's not fair is treating me like an ATM for 30 years and then calling me selfish when I finally say no. What's not fair is missing my graduation, dismissing my achievements, and pathologizing my success. What's not fair is every single way you've told me I don't matter while expecting me to act like I do. We're your parents. We've done our best. Your best wasn't good enough, Mom. And I'm done pretending it was. My mother tried guilt, then anger, then bargaining. But I held firm. $1,500 a month or Jacob could find somewhere else to live. A week later, my father called back, his voice defeated. Jacob will pay the rent. But here's what I learned later, they were paying it for him. My terms had essentially forced my parents to contribute to their own property for the first time in 3 years. The poetic justice was delicious. Jacob moved into the house 2 weeks later. The rent checks came like clockwork, always from my father's account. I deposited each one and said nothing. Then, 3 months into this new arrangement, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Kaia Morrison?" "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Stephanie. I'm Jacob's wife. Soon-to-be ex-wife." I waited. "I'm calling because I think you should know what's happening to your house. Jacob and I are separating, and I'm moving back to Denver. But before I go, I wanted to tell you that he's destroyed the place. Holes in the walls, carpets ruined, the whole house is trashed." My heart sank. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because it's your house. And because despite everything, you deserve better than to be screwed over by your family again. I've watched how they treat you. It's not right." I flew to Kansas City that weekend. When I walked into the house I'd grown up in, the house I'd been paying for, I wanted to cry. Every room was a disaster. The walls had holes punched in them, some large enough to see the studs behind. The carpets were stained with what looked like beer and wine and things I didn't want to identify. The kitchen was filthy, dishes piled in the sink, food rotting on counters. The bathrooms were unusable. Jacob was passed out on the couch, empty bottles surrounding him like a shrine to his dysfunction. I took photos of everything. Every damaged wall, every stained surface, every sign of destruction and neglect. Then I called my lawyer. I'd started working with one when my book deals got serious enough to need legal review. "I want to evict him, and I want to sue for damages." "How much notice did you give him about the property being yours?" "It's in the lease agreement he signed 3 months ago." "Then we can proceed. Give me 24 hours to draft the paperwork." The eviction notice was delivered by sheriff's deputy 2 days later. Jacob called me, and he was screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "You can't do this. This is family property. You can't evict family. It's my property, Jacob. And you violated the lease terms by damaging it. You have 30 days to vacate. Dad will never forgive you for this. Never. Dad has never seen me as anything but a convenient resource. I stopped caring about his forgiveness a long time ago. You're a cold bitch, you know that? All you care about is money. All I care about is not being used anymore. There's a difference. When you're old and alone with no family, remember this moment. Remember that you chose money over blood. I chose myself over people who've spent 30 years telling me I don't matter. I'd make that choice again every single time." I hung up and blocked his number. My parents tried to intervene, calling my lawyer, sending certified letters, showing up at my condo in Chicago unannounced. But my lawyer shut down every attempt. The house was mine, the lease was legal, Jacob had violated it. He had to leave. The day he moved out, my father called me one final time. "I hope you're proud of yourself. You've destroyed your brother's life. Destroyed this family." "No, Dad. Jacob destroyed his own life by never learning to take responsibility for his actions. And you destroyed this family by teaching him that he could. You're not the daughter I raised." The words should have hurt. Once upon a time, they would have shattered me. "You're right," I said calmly. "I'm not the daughter you raised. Because you didn't raise me. You ignored me. And I raised myself into someone who knows her worth. Don't call here again. You're not welcome in this family. I haven't been welcome in this family since the day I was born, Dad. I'm just finally accepting it." I hung up and blocked their numbers. The house needed $40,000 in repairs. I paid for it out of the profit from my most recent book deal. Then I listed it for sale. The market was hot in Kansas City, and it sold in 2 weeks for twice what my parents had originally paid. After covering the remaining mortgage, the repair costs, and the real estate fees, I netted $115,000. I donated $50,000 to a scholarship fund for first-generation college students from families that couldn't or wouldn't support their education. The other 65,000 I invested in starting my own publishing imprint focused on amplifying marginalized voices, stories about people who'd been overlooked, dismissed, told they didn't matter. But the real transformation wasn't financial. It was internal. For 29 years, I'd carried the weight of not being enough for my family. Not the right gender, not impressive enough, not worth protecting or celebrating or even noticing. I'd achieved success after success, and each time I'd waited for them to notice, to celebrate, to finally say they were proud. They never did. And in finally accepting that they never would, I found something I'd been searching for my entire life: freedom. Freedom from needing their approval. Freedom from shrinking myself to fit their narrow definitions. Freedom from waiting to be chosen when I could choose myself. 6 months after selling the house, my 7th novel was published. It became my breakout book, the one that hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list and stayed there for 16 weeks. It was optioned for film. It won awards. It was translated into 23 languages. A reporter asked during an interview if I was close with my family. "I have a beautiful chosen family," I said. "People who show up for me, celebrate me, see me." Blood relation doesn't guarantee real relationship. Real family is the people who prove they value you through consistent action, not just expectation. The clip went viral. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of messages from people, mostly women, who'd experienced similar dynamics. Who'd been the invisible child, the family ATM, the one expected to give everything while receiving nothing. I started speaking about it more openly. About invisible labor, about golden child dynamics, about family systems that require one person to be small so another can be big. My platform grew exponentially. My 8th novel sold for high 6 figures in a heated auction between publishers. My backlist was being reissued with new covers and major marketing campaigns. I was getting speaking invitations from universities, conferences, women's organizations. 2 years after I'd blocked my parents' numbers, I got an email from my mother. The subject line: "Please read this." I almost deleted it. But curiosity won. The email was long, rambling, clearly written over multiple sessions with lots of emotion. But the core message was this: Jacob's life had continued its downward spiral after the eviction. He'd lost his job, his wife officially divorced him, he'd been cycling through temporary work and temporary housing. My parents had been supporting him financially and emotionally, draining their retirement savings in the process. They were exhausted. Broke. And finally seeing the dynamic they'd created. "We realize now that we failed you," my mother wrote. "We took you for granted because you were always so capable, so independent. You never seemed to need us the way Jacob did. We poured everything into him because we thought he needed more help. But we created someone who can't function on his own. And we pushed away the daughter who actually had her life together. She wanted to reconcile. To rebuild our relationship. To make amends." I sat with the email for a week before responding. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let them live with the consequences of their choices the way I'd had to live with mine. But another part of me, the part that had spent 30 years longing for their recognition, wanted to know if real change was possible. "I appreciate you reaching out," I finally wrote back. "But reconciliation isn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about acknowledging harm, understanding its impact, and doing the genuine work to change. I'm open to rebuilding something, but it has to be on different terms. Terms where I'm seen, valued, and treated with respect. Not as the capable one who doesn't need attention, but as your daughter who deserves it anyway. If you're willing to do that work, real, uncomfortable, transformative work, then we can talk. If you're looking for me to just forgive and forget and slot back into being the family emotional support system, the answer is no." My mother responded immediately, "Yes. Whatever it takes. Please." Part 3: The Reckoning and Rebirth Family Therapy. That's what it took. Months of sessions with a therapist who specialized in toxic family dynamics, golden child/scapegoat patterns, and intergenerational trauma. The first session was excruciating. My parents sat on one couch, I sat on another with an empty seat between us that felt symbolic. Dr. Patricia Okafor, our therapist, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd reviewed our individual intake forms and knew exactly what kind of family system she was dealing with. "Kaia, why don't you start by telling your parents what you need them to understand?" Dr. Okafor suggested. I looked at them. My father looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that wasn't just physical. My mother's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her expression hovering between hopeful and terrified. "I need you to understand that ignoring me wasn't neutral," I started, my voice steadier than I felt. "Every time you missed an event, dismissed an achievement, or prioritized Jacob's wants over my needs, you were teaching me that I didn't matter. That my value was in being useful and invisible. That taking up space was selfish." My mother's eyes filled with tears immediately. "I need you to understand that this wasn't about Jacob being more needy. It was about you being more comfortable with traditional gender roles. Jacob was the son, the heir, the one who mattered. I was the daughter, the one expected to be accommodating and grateful for scraps." My father opened his mouth to object, but Dr. Okafor held up a hand. "Let her finish. I need you to understand that paying for everything wasn't generosity. It was survival. I paid your mortgage because letting the house go into foreclosure would have destroyed my credit before my life even started. I did it to protect myself, not to be the dutiful daughter. And the fact that you never noticed, never thanked me, never even acknowledged it? That tells me everything about how invisible I was in this family." "Kaia," my father started. "I'm not done. I need you to understand that your approval became irrelevant years ago. I stopped needing it because I realized I'd never get it. So I built a life that didn't require your validation. And that life is good. Really good. I don't need you anymore. I'm here because some part of me wants to find out if we can build something new. But if we can't, I'll be fine. You need to understand that you need this reconciliation more than I do." The truth of that statement hung in the air. I'd spent 30 years desperate for their approval, and they'd spent those years taking me for granted. Now the power dynamic had completely inverted. My mother was crying openly now. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "Sorry is a start," Dr. Okafor interjected. "But Kaia needs more than apologies. She needs you to understand the specific ways you harmed her and commit to changing those patterns." "Mr. Morrison, what did you hear Kaia say?" My father looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. "She's saying we favored Jacob. That we ignored her achievements. And how did that make her feel?" He struggled with the question, unable or unwilling to step into my perspective. "I imagine, hurt. Dad, I'm right here. You can ask me." He looked at me, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in my life. "How did it make you feel?" "Invisible. Worthless. Like I had to earn the right to exist by being useful and perfect and never needing anything. Like I was a problem to be managed rather than a daughter to be loved." My father's face crumpled. "I never meant to make you feel that way. But you did. Impact matters more than intent." Over the following months, we excavated decades of dysfunction. Session after session of difficult truths, painful realizations, and slow, incremental progress. My father had to confront his own upbringing, a household where sons were valued and daughters were afterthoughts. He'd internalized those messages and replicated them without conscious thought. Recognizing that pattern was agonizing for him, a dismantling of his entire worldview. My mother had to face her own complicity. She'd seen the favoritism, felt uncomfortable with it, but never intervened because confronting my father was harder than letting me absorb the hurt. She'd prioritized her own comfort over her daughter's well-being. They both had to sit with the reality that they'd created a golden child who couldn't function and a scapegoat who'd become wildly successful specifically because she'd learned to survive without them. "Jacob can't hold down a job for more than 6 months," my mother admitted in one session. "He expects things to be handed to him. When they're not, he falls apart. Because you taught him that effort was optional, I said, not unkindly. You rescued him from every consequence, solved every problem, made every excuse. You robbed him of the opportunity to develop resilience. And you? Dr. Okafor asked. What did they teach you? That I was on my own. That love was conditional and had to be earned. That failure wasn't an option because there was no safety net. I paused. Which sounds harsh, but honestly, it made me strong. Stronger than Jacob will ever be. My father flinched at that. Do you resent him? Dr. Okafor asked me. Jacob? I considered the question carefully. I used to. I spent years angry at him for being the favorite, for taking and taking without ever giving back. But honestly? He's a victim of their choices too, just in a different way. They crippled him by making him believe the world owed him everything. That's not love. That's ego management. The hardest session came when Dr. Okafor asked me what I'd needed from them as a child. I needed you at my graduation, I said, looking directly at my parents. I needed you to read my stories and be proud instead of concerned. I needed you to celebrate my scholarships and publications the way you celebrated Jacob's mediocre accomplishments. I needed you to see me as valuable for existing, not just for being useful. We didn't realize, my mother started. You didn't want to realize, I interrupted, my voice breaking. Because realizing would have meant changing. Would have meant confronting your own biases and doing the hard work of unlearning them. It was easier to tell yourselves that I was fine, that I didn't need attention, that I was just naturally independent. You're right, my father said quietly. It was the first time he'd fully agreed with me without deflection or excuse. You're absolutely right. We took the easy path. And we damaged you in the process. The acknowledgement broke something open in me. I cried in that session harder than I'd cried in years. Not sad crying, but the kind of crying that releases pressure that's been building for decades. My mother moved to sit beside me, asking permission with her eyes before putting her arm around me. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry we didn't see you. It wasn't fixed. Not even close. But it was real. And real was more than we'd ever had before. Therapy continued for 8 months. We met every 2 weeks, working through layers of resentment and misunderstanding and the slow, painful process of rebuilding trust. My parents started making genuine effort outside of therapy. My mother began reading my books, actually reading them, cover to cover, making notes and asking thoughtful questions. She started coming to my book events, sitting in the audience with pride visible on her face. My father started asking about my life. Not generic questions, but specific ones that showed he was paying attention. What I was working on, who I was seeing, what I cared about. He started calling just to talk, not because he needed something. It felt strange at first. Foreign. Like learning a new language late in life. But slowly, it started to feel like maybe we could build something resembling a real relationship. Jacob, notably, wanted nothing to do with the therapy or the reconciliation. When my parents invited him to a session, he refused. I don't need therapy, he told them. I need you to stop letting Kaia manipulate you. She's turned you against me. He sent me a bitter email blaming me for destroying the family, calling me vindictive and cruel. I didn't respond. Some people never develop the capacity for self-reflection, and my brother was apparently one of them. My parents struggled with that reality. They wanted to fix him, to help him, to make him understand what they'd done wrong. But Dr. Okafor was clear, you can't force someone to engage with their own dysfunction. Jacob has to want to change. Until he does, all you can do is stop enabling him and focus on the relationships that are workable. It was hard for them, setting boundaries with Jacob. Years of rescue patterns don't disappear overnight. But slowly, they started saying no. Stopped giving him money. Stopped solving his problems. Stopped making excuses. Jacob's life continued its downward trajectory. He burned through jobs, relationships, apartments. And for the first time, my parents let him experience the natural consequences of his choices instead of cushioning every fall. "It's the hardest thing I've ever done," my mother told me during one of our now regular phone calls. "Watching him struggle and not swooping in to fix it. That's what real love looks like sometimes," I said. "Letting people fail so they can learn to succeed on their own." Meanwhile, my own life continued to flourish. My 8th novel was another massive success. My publishing imprint had launched 15 titles in its first 2 years, 3 of which had won major awards. I was invited to give keynote speeches at conferences, universities, literary festivals. I bought a second home in Maine, a little cottage by the water where I could write in peace. I traveled, Paris, Barcelona, Tokyo, all the places I'd dreamed about during those years of working 3 jobs and eating ramen. I dated, had relationships, some that ended and some that taught me what I wanted. I built a chosen family of friends who showed up consistently, celebrated me genuinely, and never made me feel like I was too much or not enough. And slowly, carefully, I let my parents back into my life. 3 years after that first therapy session, they came to visit me in Chicago. It was only the second time they'd visited my condo, and this time was entirely different from the first. They asked for a tour, genuinely interested in my space. They looked at my bookshelves lined with my own novels in different languages, at the artwork I'd collected, at the life I'd built. And they were proud. Visibly, genuinely proud. We went to dinner at my favorite restaurant, and for the first time in my memory, the conversation centered on me. My work, my life, my plans. They asked questions and actually listened to the answers. They shared stories about things I'd written that had resonated with them. My father raised his wine glass halfway through the meal. "I want to propose a toast," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "To Kaia, who became extraordinary not because of us, but in spite of us. Who taught us that real strength is knowing your worth even when the people who should reinforce it don't. We're proud of you, sweetheart. So incredibly proud." I cried right there in the restaurant. Not from sadness, but from finally hearing the words I'd spent 30 years longing for. "I'm proud of me too," I said, raising my own glass. "And I'm grateful that we're building something new. Something better." That night, back in my condo, my mother asked if she could see my office. I'd always kept it private, my sacred writing space, but something felt different now. I showed her the room overlooking the lake, the massive desk covered with notebooks and coffee cups, the wall where I'd framed the covers of all my books. She stopped in front of that wall, looking at each cover, reading each title. Then she turned to me with tears streaming down her face. "You did all of this without us," she said. "You built this entire extraordinary career, and we weren't there for any of it." "Not all of it," I corrected gently. "You're here now. That counts for something. Does it? Can we ever really make up for those years? You can't undo the past, Mom. But you can choose differently in the present. That's what you're doing. That's what matters." She hugged me then, and it felt real. Not the obligatory hugs from my childhood, but a genuine embrace from someone who finally saw me. A year later, my 9th novel was published. This one was about reconciliation, the messy, imperfect process of rebuilding relationships after they've been broken. About forgiveness that doesn't require forgetting. About the courage it takes to let people back in after they've hurt you. I dedicated it to my parents, for Mom and Dad, who proved that it's never too late to choose differently. They came to the book launch in Chicago. Sat in the front row. When I acknowledged them during my speech, talking about the difficulty of writing about family, about growth, about the difference between the relationship we had and the one we're building, they cried openly. After the reading, dozens of people approached them wanting to talk, to share their own stories of family estrangement and reconciliation. My father listened to each person with genuine attention, and I saw him starting to understand that our story wasn't unique. That thousands of families struggled with these same dynamics. I had no idea how common this was, he told me afterward. How many people have been hurt by the same patterns we perpetuated? That's why I write about it, I said. Because silence protects dysfunction. Speaking truth creates possibility for change. But not every story gets a redemption arc. 6 months after that book launch, I ran into Jacob. I was in Kansas City for a speaking event at the university, and I stopped at a coffee shop near campus. He was there, looking older and harder than I remembered, working on a laptop in the corner. Our eyes met. For a moment, I thought he'd ignore me. Instead, he closed his laptop and walked over. Kaia. Jacob. I heard you were in town. Big fancy speech at the university? Just to talk about my work. He laughed bitterly. Of course. The famous author. Mom and Dad can't stop talking about you. It's like I don't even exist anymore. Jacob, don't, he interrupted. Don't pretend you're not loving this. You finally got what you always wanted. You're the favorite now. I looked at my brother, really looked at him. Saw the anger and resentment etched into his face, the way he wore his victimhood like armor. And I felt something surprising, pity. I never wanted to be the favorite, I said quietly. I just wanted to be seen. There's a difference. Must be nice, being perfect. Being the one they're proud of. I'm not perfect, Jacob. I just did the work. On myself, on my career, on my relationships. That's available to you too if you're willing. Easy for you to say. You didn't have the pressure I had growing up. You weren't expected to carry on the family name, to be the success story. The delusion was staggering. Jacob, I had no expectations at all. Which meant I had to create my own. You had every advantage, financial support, emotional support, constant encouragement, and you squandered it. That's not my fault. You turned them against me. I told them the truth. What they did with that truth was their choice. He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Not quite self-awareness, but maybe the beginning of it. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if they'd treated us equally? He asked quietly. All the time. I think we both would have been healthier. You would have learned resilience. I would have learned I mattered. So we're both victims. In different ways, yes. But at some point, we have to stop being victims and start being survivors. I made that choice years ago. You can too, if you want. Is that what you're offering? Sisterly advice? I'm offering the same thing I offer anyone, the truth that you can't change the past, but you can change what you do with it. You can let it define you or you can let it strengthen you. Jacob shook his head. You always did have all the answers. I have my answers, Jacob. You need to find yours. He walked away without another word. I never saw him again. But I heard, through my parents, that he eventually got help. Went to therapy, started working on himself, slowly rebuilt his life. He never reached out to me, and I never reached out to him. Some wounds heal better with distance. Part 4, The Empire. By the time I turned 38, my career had evolved beyond anything I'd dreamed. 11 published novels, 3 adapted for film, dozens of awards. But more than that, my publishing imprint had become a force in the industry. Morrison Press, I'd named it after myself as a reclamation of the family name that had never really been mine, specialized in amplifying voices that traditional publishing ignored. Women, especially women of color, from working-class backgrounds, with stories about survival and resilience and the audacity of taking up space. We'd published 43 titles in 5 years. 7 had hit bestseller lists. 2 had won National Book Awards. 1 had won the Pulitzer. But the numbers weren't what mattered most. What mattered were the stories, the emails and letters from readers who said I felt seen, this saved me, I thought I was alone. What mattered were the writers who told me that Morrison Press was the first place that saw the value in their work, who said we'd changed their lives by believing in them. What mattered was building the kind of support system I'd never had, so others wouldn't have to claw their way up alone. I hired women who'd been overlooked in traditional corporate structures. I paid above industry standard. I created pathways for people from non-traditional backgrounds to enter publishing. And the success was undeniable. Major publishers were trying to replicate our model. Agents were specifically seeking out the kind of stories we championed. We'd shifted the entire industry conversation about whose stories mattered. A profile in Publishers Weekly called me the voice of a generation of women who refused to disappear. The headline was Kaia Morrison, building an empire from being overlooked. My parents framed that article. It hung in their apartment, and every time I visited, my mother would point it out to anyone who'd listen. That's our daughter. The pride still felt strange sometimes. Like hearing a familiar song in a foreign language, recognizable but fundamentally different from what I'd spent years longing for. But I'd learned to accept it for what it was, imperfect, belated, but genuine. One evening, sitting in my main cottage watching the sunset over the water, I got an unexpected call from Dr. Okafor, our family therapist. Kaia, I hope this isn't overstepping, but I wanted to share something with you. Your parents asked if they could schedule a session, just the two of them. Okay? They wanted to talk about their own childhoods, the patterns they'd internalized, the work they still need to do. They're committed to continued growth, not just for your relationship, but for themselves. Something in my chest loosened. That's really good. It is. I've been doing this work for 25 years, and I rarely see parents your age truly commit to this kind of transformation. They're doing the work, Kaia. Real, deep work. After we hung up, I sat with that information. My parents, in their late 60s, were actively unpacking decades of conditioning and dysfunction. Not because they had to, but because they'd finally recognized the harm they'd caused and wanted to be better. It didn't undo the past. Couldn't undo those years of invisibility and neglect. But it was something. It was real. That night, I started writing my 12th novel. This one was about a woman who built an empire from nothing, who survived being disposable by becoming undeniable, who learned that sometimes the greatest gift is being underestimated because it means no one's watching closely enough to stop you. It was the most personal thing I'd ever written. The most raw. The most true. When I sent the manuscript to my editor, she called me crying. This is the one, Kaia. This is your masterpiece. The book was published 10 months later to massive critical and commercial acclaim. It debuted at #1 on every major bestseller list. The reviews were extraordinary, calling it a searing portrait of family dysfunction and the strength it takes to survive it, a love letter to every woman who was told she was too much and not enough, essential reading for understanding the invisible labor and emotional cost of being the overlooked child. The audiobook narrator won an Audie Award. The book stayed on bestseller lists for 37 weeks. It won the National Book Critics Circle Award and was a finalist for the National Book Award. But more than any of that, it connected. I got thousands of emails and messages from readers who said it changed their lives, gave them permission to set boundaries, helped them understand they weren't alone. Women shared the book with their mothers, their daughters, their therapists. Book clubs discussed it for months. It became a cultural touchstone for conversations about family dysfunction, golden child dynamics, and the radical act of choosing yourself. My parents read it together over a weekend, and then called me. Honey, can we come visit you? My mother asked. We need to talk about the book. They flew to Chicago the following weekend. We sat in my living room, the manuscript on the coffee table between us. This book, my father started, his voice rough. It's us. The parents in this story, the ones who fail their daughter so profoundly, that's us. It's fiction, Dad. It's truth disguised as fiction. And reading it, seeing our choices through your eyes, understanding the cumulative impact of all those little moments we dismissed. Kaia, I'm devastated. By what we did to you. By who we were. My mother was crying. You must have been so lonely. The truth of that statement hit me hard. I was. For a really long time I was so lonely I thought I might disappear completely. Like if I was quiet enough, still enough, maybe I'd just fade out of existence and it wouldn't even matter. It would have mattered, my father said fiercely. It matters now. You matter. I'm sorry it took me 68 years to understand that your worth wasn't something you had to earn. It was inherent. And I failed you by not seeing it. We talked for hours that day. About the book, about the past, about the work they were doing in therapy. About the continued journey of rebuilding trust and relationship. I want you to know something, my mother said as they were leaving. You may have built your empire without us, but we're incredibly proud to watch you maintain it. You're extraordinary, Kaia. You always were. I'm just sorry we were too blind to see it. After they left, I stood at my window overlooking the lake, processing the conversation. They'd done something I never expected, fully owned their failures without deflection or excuse. Acknowledged the harm without trying to minimize it. Committed to continued growth without expecting praise for basic human decency. It still didn't erase the past. Those years of invisibility had shaped me in ways that couldn't be undone. But it was healing nonetheless. A closing of a wound that had been open for 3 decades. 6 months later, my 13th novel was announced, a 7-figure deal with one of the biggest publishers in the world. The book was about chosen family, about the people who show up consistently and love you not despite your complexity but because of it. I dedicated it to my chosen family, the friends who'd become siblings, the mentors who'd become parental figures, the community that had held me when my blood family couldn't or wouldn't. But I also dedicated it to my parents, for Mom and Dad, who learned that love is a verb, not a noun. Who chose growth over comfort. Who proved it's never too late to become the people you wish you'd been all along. At the book launch, surrounded by everyone who'd supported me, my editor, my agent, my colleagues from Morrison Press, my chosen family, and my parents, I felt something I'd spent my entire life chasing, a sense of wholeness. Not because I'd finally gotten my parents' approval, but because I'd built a life so full and so rich that their approval was nice but not necessary. The difference was everything. During my speech, I talked about what it means to build an empire from being overlooked. The truth is, I said, looking out at the packed bookstore, being underestimated is a superpower. When people don't see you, they don't try to stop you. They don't put limits on what you can achieve because they're not paying attention. They don't tell you to stay small because they've already decided you are small. I spent years desperate to be seen by people who refused to look. And when I finally stopped waiting for their gaze and started building anyway, everything changed. Because it turns out, you don't need anyone's permission to take up space. You don't need validation to know your worth. You don't need approval to live authentically. You just need the courage to keep building when everyone's looking elsewhere. To keep rising when you've been told to stay down. To keep speaking when you've been told to stay quiet. The house they tried to take from me? I sold it and built an empire. The family that treated me as expendable? They learned, too late to undo the harm but not too late to change, that I was never the problem. I was always the solution, just not the one they wanted to see. And to every person here who's felt invisible, who's been told you're too much or not enough, who's been the overlooked child or the forgotten sibling or the dismissed voice, keep building anyway. Your visibility doesn't depend on their gaze. Your empire doesn't require their blessing. Build it anyway. Rise anyway. Succeed anyway. And when they finally notice, when they finally want back in, you get to decide what that looks like. Because by then, you won't need them. You'll just be choosing whether you want them. And that choice, that power to choose rather than beg, is everything. The applause was thunderous. I saw my mother crying, my father beaming with pride, my chosen family on their feet cheering. But more than that, I saw dozens of women in the audience nodding, crying, recognizing themselves in my story. Seeing possibility in my journey. Understanding that being overlooked doesn't have to be a death sentence, it can be a catalyst. After the event, a young woman approached me, maybe 22 or 23, with tears in her eyes. I'm the invisible daughter in my family, she said quietly. My brother is the golden child, and I've been killing myself trying to get my parents to notice me. Your story made me realize I've been asking the wrong people for validation. I took her hands. You don't need their approval to build something extraordinary. You just need your own permission. Give yourself that permission. Choose yourself. And watch what happens. She hugged me, and I felt the weight of that exchange. This was why I'd written these books, built this career, refused to stay silent about family dysfunction. Not for revenge or vindication, but to create possibility for others still trapped in the same patterns that had once imprisoned me. That night, I returned to my condo and stood at the windows overlooking the lake, thinking about the girl I'd been at 16. The one who'd given her valedictorian speech to an audience missing the two people who mattered most. The one who'd promised herself she'd build something so undeniable that their neglect would become their loss. She'd kept that promise. Exceeded it in every possible way. The house they'd put in my name thinking I'd be their convenient fallback plan? I'd turned it into the seed money for an empire. The daughter they'd treated as invisible? She'd become impossible to ignore. The girl they'd underestimated? She'd become the woman who changed the conversation about whose stories matter. I was Kaia Morrison. I'd been the overlooked daughter, the family ATM, the one who didn't count. And I'd transformed all of that pain and invisibility into purpose. Not in spite of being overlooked, but because of it. Because when no one hands you value, you learn to mine it from your own spine. You learn that worth is inherent, not earned. You learn that taking up space is a revolutionary act. And you learn that the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to disappear, even when everything in your environment is designed to make you fade. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother, "Thank you for letting us back in. Thank you for giving us the chance to be better. We don't deserve you, but we're grateful for you every single day." I smiled and typed back, "You're learning. That's what matters. Love you." And I meant it. Not the desperate, seeking love of my childhood. But a quieter, steadier love. The kind built on genuine connection rather than biological obligation. Outside my windows, the city lights sparkled against the dark water. Inside, I sat surrounded by the life I'd built, the books I'd written, the company I'd founded, the family I'd chosen, the parents who'd finally learned to show up. It wasn't the life I'd imagined as a 16-year-old girl sitting alone at her graduation. It was better. Messier, more complicated, more authentic. Built on truth rather than fantasy. Earned through struggle rather than granted through favor. And entirely, undeniably mine. The girl who'd given that valedictorian speech all those years ago had promised herself she'd matter. That she'd build something extraordinary. That she'd turn invisibility into power. She'd kept every promise. And the empire she'd built from being overlooked was just getting started.